The world watched in horror last week as Russian forces invaded Ukraine, kicking off a war in Europe and bringing destruction to major cities across Ukraine. In the face of these events, many companies and organizations with operations in Ukraine or employees based in Ukraine struggled with how to respond and how to support their employees. And the HR community quickly came together to try to create resources and open source collaborations for those helping people on the ground or with employees in the area. This special episode of the Amplify Digest is going to be focused on these resources. And I want to open with this piece by Oyster. And they were really quick to release this actually the day of the invasion. And it was a robust article around ways to support employees in Ukraine. This was at a time when many HR practitioners who have been on the front lines of so many events over the last 2 years worked to guide their companies through the early days of the invasion and scrambled to find ways to support employees who may be in harm's way. Remote put together this fantastic resource on how to support companies who had employees based in Ukraine. And particularly as we've moved to new hybrid and remote constructs, many organizations who are fully distributed have employees and web developers and other employees that are based in the Ukraine. And this piece gives a little more detail on how best organizations and companies can support those employees. In the early days of the invasion, usually by the next day, I wanted to start putting together an open source resource around how companies and people leaders can and should be communicating to their staff. And I put a call out on LinkedIn in this post for friends and people in my network to share internal memos that they were sending to staff. And over a dozen of you reached out, willing to share, some fully, some anonymously, but sharing the message that your chief people officers or your CEOs were sending to employees. And so this began an open source project that I was directly involved in trying to pull together those resources to help practitioners who are trying to find the right words and the right messages in this difficult moment that we faced, particularly for those of us with employees in Ukraine. How do we support them? How do we do our best to make sure that we are doing everything we can to support their situations and their families during this time? And as difficult as this situation is and will be, and we have to focus on the people in Ukraine who are on the front lines of this, the feeling can often be one of hopelessness. And I think especially for those of us that are thousands of miles removed, there's a desire to do something and to be helpful and to be of service. And oftentimes you can struggle with how to actually do that. And what I was really happy to see is so many people came forward in the open source community and began creating resources aimed at providing some of that guidance. And this was a tremendous resource created by Sergio Serrato called HR for Ukraine. It was a Notion site that he built and spun up within days of the initial invasion. And it gets into specific action items that you can take to support on the ground in Ukraine. There's a collection of donations that you can invest in if you're willing to do so to help the cause and help Ukrainians who are fighting against this aggression as we speak. There were other open source resources. Anna Ott created this platform, shared this platform, I should say, which was spun up within a day of the initial invasion, of HR practitioners in Europe trying to come together to help each other. It talked about evacuation routes out of Ukraine, borders to take, borders to stay away from. It was a real-time crowdsourced resource around how people can come together and try to help people on the ground now. And there is more. This was a tremendous Linktree account created by Kimberly St. Julian Varnon. She's based in Ukraine, and it's a collection of specific donation sites and resources aimed at helping BIPOC citizens or people trying to get out of the Ukraine now. And so another tremendous resource, and all of the resources that I'm walking through right now, I will have links to these and more in the show notes. If you're interested in having a clearer picture of what is happening on the ground, which in an event like this, in this era of disinformation, this becomes incredibly important. And so this is another Twitter list that I've been curating. There's over 100 resources here from journalists and reporters on the ground in Ukraine, diplomats and politicians who are covering this open source intelligence accounts who are, there's a massive OSINT or open source intelligence community that is tracking what is happening. But I think in this era of disinformation, it's critically important that we really make sure that we have sources helping us understand what's happening on the ground that are vetted. And here's a list that I'll continue to build to if you're interested in keeping a closer tab on what's actually happening on the ground in Ukraine. And with all of this hardship, I think it is important for us to also recognize the way that the world is coming together to stand with Ukraine. Airbnb recently announced in their nonprofit arm that they're going to be providing refugee housing for up to 100,000 refugees coming out of Ukraine, which is going to be essential because that is going to be a massive refugee crisis that we're already seeing, and we're just days into this conflict. And I want to leave you with a video from the account of Ukraine on Twitter. And it is a compilation of gatherings around the world of people coming together to stand with Ukraine. And in the coming days and weeks and months ahead, this is a conflict that they will need us all standing by them. And so if you're able to support, if you're able to help, there's a range of resources in this particular post that will help you do that, help you support what is happening in Ukraine currently. And just remember, in this time of hardship, the world is uniting in support of Ukraine. And that is incredibly important. It will continue to be incredibly important for the weeks and months to come. So I'd like to leave you with this video. And in the meantime, please take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I will see you next week.
All showing their support when Ukrainian suffering at the hands.
Breaking news. Putin chose this war. Today, I'm authorizing additional strong sanctions.
The White House is promising significant sanctions against Russia today.
That's a huge move because Switzerland, of course, traditionally remains neutral.